Truth Talks. Please, I'm excited about the Truth Talks. They are addressing true fellowship and what it means, what true fellowship and corporate worship looks like according to the Bible.
Good evening. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. How's your reading going so far? All the names starting to sound the same. This person related to that person related to that person live across the street from that person, his cousin, his uncle, his nephew. They all you start to see that they're all related in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Well, if you notice now, we're getting ready to start to go into Abraham. So remember, as we walk back from our last regular pen, there it is. and my wife got on me, said I'll walk around and I click a pen. I didn't know it, so she helped me out. It's okay. I'm a clicker. Now, as we studied last time, we walked through the genealogy from the beginning to now. So now we're to where? Where do we leave off at? I gave you an answer, right? The last person we picked up on was Abraham. We're still in chapter 1, but it is going to speed up. Trust me, once it starts to pick up the pace and we focus more and more on particular lineage, the pace picks up. However, the confusion can also pick up too, because we'll notice that at one point they say, hey, here's Caleb. And their description of how they describe their relation sometimes can be a little confusing. You may see words like, this is the brother of, but they may not have mentioned that brother in their previous genealogy. And the reason why is because they're being very specific. They want you to focus on this particular group. Remember, this whole thing is not out of happenstance. You have to think, these are generations. When you look it up, my mom used to always say, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, my mom could have been wrong too. She used to say, Jesus came through how many generations? I said, how many? She said, 40 and 2, right? 40 and 2 generations. That's a long line and lineage of history that we're covering here. 40 and 2 generations, just people constantly named. So none of these people have been married to, intermingled, the amount of children they had, the amount of children they didn't have, because we see some in the text who they just say, it's kind of like sad too. You're reading and they're like, such and such had a son here and this son here, and then they get there and they're like, and this person, he ain't had no kids. No, nothing. They just say he had nothing. He ain't had no sons, no daughter. They just say he died childless. So a lot of times we see that in there. You could ask those questions. Why did this person die childless? I don't know. Why the information was in a lot of it, when I go back to look it up. Children. The chroniclers, when they got into the temple and they were rebuilding after all of the wars and all of the fall, they needed to start to put at least at a minimum so we can see that kingly line from David. Now, also with the Chronicles, this book, right? This was what temple? What temple were the chroniclers writing? The first temple or second temple? So it's the second temple. So this is the second temple. So this is even before Christ. This is still after all of the captivity, after everything happened with Israel and Judah. They are saying that we still have a right to the throne, because who is the king in the days of Jesus? The king Herod, right? And the reason why I mentioned that is because sitting on that throne is a false king, right? Is Herod's line of succession anywhere in there? No. Not at all. He just took over king. And I bring that point because as we start to talk about Esau and Edom, that is one of the kingdoms to where it wasn't a child in the line of succession. It was actually just anyone in the land who would take over the king. This was different because in the tribal era, when a tribal leader died, it normally went to the most senior person in that tribe, and a lot of the times with family members. And we see a lot of that in modern time today. Pastor be a pastor of a church 50, 60 years, then he died and his son take over. It's still a continued practice in some form of variation. But as we see with Edom, after we get to meet Abraham and his 2 sons, right? But we're going to meet Abraham, because last week we met Abraham's extended family, the one that everybody somehow, so when we learn and go to church and all this Bible study, we met a part of Abraham family. A lot of people were reading the Bible and say, hey, I didn't even know Abraham had more than 2 sons. Here we thought it was just this. So let's get into it. So we'll start from chapter 28 and chapter 1, verse 28. No, everybody want to know. We're going to just stay right here on verse 1. All right. So in verse 1 right here, we have from Abraham to Jacob. Now it's very interesting that it says Abraham to Jacob. How many years, how many different prophecies, how many different things happened to the Israelites in between that particular phase, Abraham to Jacob? Just a rough estimate. You don't have to give me that because that's a lot. It's a lot, right? Abraham, we see Abraham leave his father. We see him cast off his father's idols. We see him go out and he follows the God Yahweh in a time where most gods they had their own statues, idol worship, and everything else. So Abraham has now became the father of faith. He has stepped out away from everything, and he is now believing in what God promised him. Children as numerous as the stars in the sands. Well, Abraham is hard to see that because we see that Abraham got his 2 sons, and this is where we follow this line for them children. But we also see that Abraham started to grow in children. Ishmael had children. Isaac had children. So let's look into Ishmael and Isaac. Now, if you notice when we open it up, it tells you of Abraham. It says the sons of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael. We already know that he had other sons, not even going there. These are their genealogy. The firstborn of Ishmael was Nebaioth, and then Kedar, Adbel, Mizbasam, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hada, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kadima. I've been working on these names. I'm telling y'all, I'm getting better. These are the sons of Ishmael. Now, Ishmael had his own sons. Now, remember what I told y'all, Ishmael and Abraham, and we hear Ishmael leave, and then we hear Ishmael returns for the funeral. But in between there, we see Ishmael has some interaction with Jacob. When we actually see Ishmael shows up to Jacob in what manner? Full force, right? He was full force on the other side of the river, enough to make Jacob say, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself." Ishmael had his children, he was sent away. Getting these family lines, there's a lot of them. Ishmael had his children, he was sent away. But as we can see, Ishmael also had sons. So we know that the promise that God made Ishmael and Hagar was fulfilled because he had his own sons. His tribe started to grow. Again, we do not have a king. We do not have a king. There are kings in the land, but Israel has no king. And it's actually mentioned in here as we go through the text. So let's continue.
It said that he had 12 sons. You match 12 sons of
12 and 12. Well, that gets later because Israel had the 12. Ishmael also went out and produced a kingdom. Now that kingdom grew pretty large, and if you look on the charts, you can see how the Ishmaelites turned into they grouped into the Arabs. They mingled with the Edomites in the mountain and Seir. So when we see all of this, we start to see these families who somehow separated through name, through conflict, through interaction, through whatever. Went their separate ways, and now we're going to start to see them kind of come back around each other, either through marriage, through giving in marriage, because we've seen it. I don't know how far y'all may have read, but we've seen that some people's son, right, or daughters, he didn't have no sons, and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna just go ahead and give you to my servant." And it lets me. This is a good point in that time to understand what we go back to what we seen in Deuteronomy, and we learn about the servant. So we're gonna let's continue on. Let's roll through these names. All right. Now the sons of Midian. Now, if you notice, it went specifically to the sons of Midian. That is a subsidiary of who? And the reason why I'm doing this is because it's easy to get stumbled up in the names to say, whose son are we talking about? Why are we talking about that particular son? Huh? Oh, right now I'm on verse 33. Chapter 1, 33. We just went through all of the sons of Ishmael. All right, and then we had Abraham's concubines, which we talked about. And then the sons of Midian, that was one of Abraham's concubines. It's continuing on to push through as the family lineage goes. You see how it is? It'll tell you a list of sons, and then it might talk about a particular son in those lineage. A lot of those names we come across and we see later as kingdoms, areas, cities, populations of people, groups being mixed in there.
In verse 32, again, that where it said the sons of Qatar.
Yeah.
Okay, and all those names was Abraham's kids through her.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get to verse 32, he says the sons of Midian. Those are more kids that he had by somebody else. Am I right?
Those were the sons of Midian.
Right, okay.
So
Midian.
Abraham's concubine. So that's what I'm saying. It's because when we get to Caleb, it's going to do that quite a lot. It's going to talk about Caleb, and it's going to talk about somebody else, and it's going to go back and maybe talk about Caleb, and then it's going to talk about Caleb's sons. And sometimes we refer to Caleb as a brother of somebody else. So this is why I'm trying to give you the clarity, because right here it talks about the sons of Midian.
But you pull one of the sons out of Qatar.
One of the sons.
And
One of the sons. And you'll see that because it's gonna get so distinctive that it's gonna pull down, and we're gonna end up rolling into Absalom and David's line, because it's gonna do that. It's gonna go by the son.
It's important to also point out in the scriptures, sometimes it says son, meaning you're talking about grandson, or down the line. It's not talking about father and physical son.
Right.
It's talking about father and maybe grandson or son 3 generations removed. You have to take that into consideration too, because in this case right here.
Sons of Midian. Okay, Midian here, Midian here.
If you look right here, it says, the sons of Midian, and also says, these are the sons of
son
Keturah.
himself having his.
Well,
Okay.
these are the grandchildren.
Hold on, let me hear what you gotta say.
I'm sorry.
No, you good. We got it.
Yeah.
We ready.
See how we jumping from. We'll tell you a whole list of sons, and then we'll tell you. And Eric brought up a good point. He said just because they're mentioning the sons, this could be a generational thing. It may not be a particular grandsons, but I do believe in this particular order in the Chronicles, unless it's stated that they're talking about a greater body of people, you'll see that it's a direct line of the sons. And you'll see they're going to start talking about how cities and everything else are starting to get brought into it, because we see that a lot of the people that David had his conquest against, right, in the past, they were named after that particular thing, but they had rulers. Pharaoh ruled Misraim, which was Egypt, which was also a son that was mentioned. So you see how these sons grew into nations, and they put over the nations rulers. Now, there are some, again, non-canonical books. If you go and you look in Jasher, it talks about this. It talks about the wars, the conquest. And when we read when we read in books like Jeremiah and Isaiah, and they talk about idol worship, a lot of these idols that were constructed and built up during these times were the kings. They would go out and they would say, I'm a god. They would fashion it up, and they would continue. And as their sons would come up, they would put their sons in a line. Remember, we hear when Moses is leaving Egypt, that it's Pharaoh the what? Not the one that was initially dealing with Joseph. It was a whole nother Pharaoh. And a lot of times that's how they would keep in line to show their godliness. To say, people say, wow, the Pharaoh lives forever because he just kept naming his son Pharaoh. That same one. And they would just say it's more of a reincarnation of the son. So we see that concept is going to get adapted by certain tribes, and other tribes are going to maintain what we know in that line to Jesus Christ. They're not going to set themselves up as idols, something you hear throughout the Bible. These men in the early beginning, as they built nations up, they set themselves up to be gods. We see a later one that came by after a greater conquest in Daniel. And the reason why you'll hear me speak of Daniel later on, because if you can get this concept that these were just men in a bloodline who had certain villages, certain kings, certain family lineage, they went off and they started their own thing. And as they started their own thing, they built themselves up kingdoms. Because we're going to meet Amalek. right? As we go down in this lineage here, Abraham became the father of who? Isaac. We always know that Abraham and Isaac. We hear Abraham and Isaac, but we learn that there were other sons. We also learn that Ishmael had children. But Abraham became the father of Isaac. The sons of Isaac was Esau and Israel. Now, this is where we continue to see, now this lineage is going to go down even more. We're going to see Esau and Jacob, who is later is Israel. Remember, he was coming across the river. He was running from his brother Esau, who had the big army. Well, after Esau left home, Esau went up into the mountain, Seir. But we see how Seir here, that mountain he going, was also a son. Somebody had sons up there. Now, when I went and looked up who was Seir, it really didn't have a lot, but I'll give it to you. I'm getting ahead of myself because I like to. I got you. All right. So Abraham became the father of Isaac. The sons of Isaac was Esau, which we know is the twins, Esau and Jacob. The sons of Esau. Now it's going to get into the sons of Esau. The sons of Esau is Eliphaz, Ruel, Jehush, Jalam, and Korah. The sons of Eliphaz is now here again. You see where it did it, right? If you can catch those moments where they jump from the big family to the little, you'll see the line as it continues to go, and you'll be able to see both sides. You'll be able to see the sides where they're showing you a side of how the kingdoms are outside of Christ is growing, and they'll show you the side of how the kingdoms inside of Christ is growing. And as we read, we'll realize that inside of this kingdom, we'll get to see the turmoil. And I know, just stick with me through these names, because as we get through the names, we're going to start to get to the people. And as we start to get to the people, that's where I'll put that shift in there. We may pause here in the Chronicles, and go to Kings. And if you put these two books together, you'll start to see how these people fall in place and how the kingdom got to where it was, what we just learned in Daniel. All right? Might even start to meet some of them prophets and some of them other seers that are walking around in the midst of all this name dropping right here. Chronicles is the ultimate name dropping book. You want to feel smart? Just walk in there and start telling people the genealogy. Just drop some names on it. This person is related to that person. Eventually, everybody be like, "Ooh, you know everything." You really don't. You just know how to read a lot of names. And so that's the biggest part, reading some of the names. All right. So we see some of the descendants of Esau. Now, when we get to Seir, it says the sons of Seir, Lotan, Shabal, Zibeon, Anaha, Dishan, Ezer, and another Dishan? Dishan. All right. Now, they're going to talk about sons of Lotan, but let me give you a little bit on Seir. Very interesting. I got my notes. I like to read from what I found and then talk about it, as opposed to just tell you, hey, this is what I found, because I know y'all trust me, but some of this stuff is pretty interesting when you go in there and you look at what Seir is. Okay, so Seir was a significant figure amongst the Horites and the ancient people who inhabited the region of Mount Seir, later known as Edom. So when we hear that the Edomites, and you hear Edom, how can you do your brother like that? And phrases throughout the scriptures, Edom, I will punish you harder or more severe for what you did to your brother. Now we have an understanding who Edom is. It's the people that Esau, when he moved into the mountains of Seir, he began to mingle with them and have children. And as they had children, they became relatives to Jacob. You see how some of those things in the later testament, when they mention those lines about Edom's wickedness, what they should have did, how they should have acted, because they were family. They should have known what Jacob known. All right. So if you want scriptures regarding the Mount Seir, because again, it's not a lot. In fact, when you go and you look in the genealogy of Seir, it doesn't mention who his father was or anything else. Particularly, it just tells you about this part right here of them being in the mountains and Edom and Esau moving up in there, and that's how it got there. If you have for note takers, Genesis 14:6, it describes Seir inhabited by the Horites. If you want to go read that later. And then in Genesis 36:20-30, it tells you about who became the chief of the Horites. And the sons is listed. We already got the genealogy right here, but it also tells you those sons. All right. The mention of Seir provided insight in the genealogy and the history of the Horites. They inhabited the region of Mount Seir before the Edomites and are mentioned in genealogy lists in connection to their history of the region. the Horites' presence in the region of Mount Seir is important, a part of the biblical account providing context and history of the Edomites and their interaction with the Israelites. Remember, I know I'm saying the Horites, right? Because that's the people that was in the mountain of Seir. People were known by their group in their region. This is also Israel has no land. So at this time, they have not went into the promised land.
Right.
And this part of the story and this part of genealogy, they have not went to the promised land. And I promise you, I'm not giving you a recap of the whole Bible. It sounds like it, but if you follow the lineage, you have to follow the people. Yes, all right. So as we see, that's about as much as we're going to get on the people who inhabited Mount Seir. We know the Edom, and we know it was the Horites, and we know that in several occasions Israel may have had some interaction with those particular groups of people. Now back to the story. Look at the story. All right. So now that we got Mount Seir, and it talks about that, and it goes and it tells the son of Anai, Dishon, he was one of the other sons of Dishon, the two that I always get their name mixed up. All right. Herathim, the son of Ezer, and it continues on. Balhan, Zavan, Jakai, the sons of Dishon is Uz and Aran. Anything that anybody else pulled out about the people of Seir in your studies or notes that I may have missed? It was one of the ones. All right. So now we have the establishment of the Mount of Seir. I want you to continue to think about where we are in the scriptures. Jacob is at his uncle's house. Edom has built up the people in Seir. Now, this doesn't mean that the Edomites rule Seir. It just means that their people are there among the mountain people of Seir. Now, I believe when I looked it up, it's like in Turkey somewhere, or it used to be in modern-day Turkey, higher mountains. So these are the people of Seir. Edom has come, and now we start to see the establishment of kings. Because it says here, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over Israel. Don't worry about it, I didn't understand it either. reigned over Israel. So then it goes into the list of sons. We have Belor, son of Beor, and we hear some of those cities, right? In the Old Testament, as you walk through them, those who are going back and rekindling your love for the previous books up into here, you'll start to see some of these names, some of these characters. All right. Beor, Bela, son of Beor, whose city was called the Hanabab. Did I get that? The Hanabab? Yeah. I would ask for directions, so I'm already lost trying to get that shit. All right. When Bela died, Joab, son of Joram, Basra succeeded him. When Joab died, Husham of the land of the Temanites succeeded him. And as you can see, I'm not going to read them all, but I'm showing you that the land in Edom was ruled by different kings. Basically, if a king died, whoever was the most powerful at that time stepped up and ruled over Edom, which was, who are the people of Edom? Edomites. But when we say Edomites, what group of people? Esau and the Horites.
Okay.
They lived in the mountain of Seir. Seir was the one who probably was the first one to move up in that mountain. Remember, these are times where the land is very, very vast. People move to a land and just set it up and say, this is what we're going to call this land. And well, what do you call it? Well, what's my name? Let's just call it that from here on out. And as it grows and the groups continue to stay in there, those cultures stay in there. A lot of people say, well, the land of Israel. Why is the land of Israel called Israel? Because God planted the Israelites right there. And he said, this is your land. In Canaan, when we think about the Canaanites, right? We hear that land was given to Canaan way before. At some point, when Noah told him, your sons are going to serve him, that land has already been established. So when we hear a lot of things in the scriptures, we have to see that some of these things have already been established. We just hear them now through the names, and you can get them in here. Genealogy is pretty cool.
So here you talk about these kings, they didn't go from father to child to grandchild. They just whoever was the strongest or more.
Tribe leaders.
Unlike the pharaoh, they just passed it down to assume that their God was still alive. They just passed it down to the name through the genealogy.
through the genealogy. Just keep it going through the genealogy. And if you look here, you start to see a lot of the other countries that get involved with the Edomites as they start to take lands like from Moab. And Moab was Lot's daughters. And Lot's daughter was Abraham. You see how all this is related, right? It's just now it's bigger. Instead of saying they took the land from Lot's family, they just say we took the land from Moab because those people were the Moabites. That was the land that they settled in. Remember, it really isn't a lot of kings. When Abraham goes up against those 5 kings, that's a big thing. That is a huge event that most people, when we think about what Abraham did in a time in that era, we see, oh, Abraham took 5 kings. Well, if it's 5 kings in a land where ain't no kings, and you go in to take on the 5 things that don't exist anywhere else, you're a pretty bad person. But kings did exist. Because even though we're following this genealogy, we hear of a king mentioned really early in their genealogy that we kind of don't think about it. Who was the first king? Well, outside we know that Jesus and God is king, but when we talk about this genealogy, what was a king name that was mentioned in here? Before that, let's go back even further. We might even have to go back to the beginning. I'll just make it easy on y'all. He was king of Jerusalem. Melchizedek. He's in here, and they said it. Now again, this is one of the things that the theologians sit around and talk about, but due to age, due to the area, due to the people, they say Shem was the king of Jerusalem. Now remember, Shem was the king of Jerusalem. All right, now him being the king of Jerusalem, this is a whole different type of kingdom. Remember, these 5 kings that are set up here are self-appointed. They literally went up to the mountains of Edom and said, we're going to be kings. In fact, whoever gave them the knowledge, right, king of the hill, top of the mountain. Remember, mountains were high places. They dug into them. They used them for fortification. They used them to build into walls. They built their cities. They build these mountains up really big. And they said, well, we have one of the highest mountains, Seir. So they dug in and they called themselves kings. Because right here it says, there's no other kings in the land but them. All right, so when we see that, we see that those 5 kings, and then we hear of Melchizedek. Now again, it's been debated amongst the theologians, but a lot of people say that Melchizedek was Shem. Good to see in the genealogy because Shem is pointed out in this genealogy. Again, if you want to dig into that theory, go for it. With me, I just show that there was a king, but that king was in the order that God put him as a king versus these 5 kings who nominated themselves. Tracking. Told you it's going to get a little muddy over here. It's a little muddy. It ain't swampy yet. All right. So we see Esau. We see his family. We see them set up the kings. And it talks about the kings. We see Midian gets defeated by the country of Moab. Notice they said the country. And it says succeeded him, and the name of the city was Avith. And Hadad died, and Samalah of Merrick succeeded him. We see people coming from all throughout the land. And when Samalah died, Saul of Rehoboth on the river succeeded him. And Saul died. Baalhana, son of Achbor, succeeded him. And while Baalhana died, as you can see, it just keeps going on and on and on. And these, now, if you notice, it told us of the kings. It told us of the sons. Now, these are the clans of the Edomites. Why would they particularly break down clans here? We got kings. Why clans? Well, think about what the Israelites were doing when they came out. It's almost in reverse. They started with the clans. Then the clans went to the judges. And then the judges the people finally asked for a king. These people had their kings, and then they organized them into clans, and their clans got organized, and that's how they ran their kingdom. So who you think the head of these clans were? Hmm? Well, those were the kings. That was the kinglyship continuously being transferred over. But this right here talks about the clans. These are the people. The clans of Edom were. These were the clans of Edom were. There it is. These are yeah. And here it say clans. I'm sorry. So chiefs. So if you got chiefs, these were the people who they put over the clans. Those were the ones in charge. So from there, now we're going to get into a little bit more of the line. All right. So where are we so far? I wanted to erase the board and kind of just start drawing a line down and veer it off, but we'd have been here all day and have been way too many people and too many X's and dots. But right now, where are we? Where are we?
Chapter 2 now, you did family Israel.
Sons of Israel. So we're gonna kind of backtrack, right? We just told Edom all the way up. Edom right now, the way it seemed like Esau was born, Jacob was born, and the next thing you know, Esau's in the mountains with a whole family and a big old clan. Remember, this is after the fact. They're telling the story as it goes. So sometimes they'll tell the story of one line to the end to show you where they are, and then we're going to get right back to Israel. So when we're going through Israel, you're going to see this is a very biased writer. Not biased in the sense of he was being mean, not biased in the sense of he was, being messy. He was biased in the sense of, again, this whole thing is just to show the kinglyship of David. Because if I can show you David, when you open up Matthew, it just makes more sense.
So in Edom, you had kings and chiefs.
So the kings, think about the reverse. Remember, as we went through the early books of Genesis, all the way up to Exodus, then we got our first judge, right? The judges were the chiefs of the tribes, but the judge was pulled out from the tribe to judge over Israel. But each judge, now, when we get later on into Kings and Chronicles, we'll see how these 10 tribes, they went from judges to kings to the same thing we see with Edom, to where it was one person over the clans. Because what was Israel? I mean, hopefully y'all been reading a little bit ahead. What was Israel? Tribe-wise. We're speaking on tribe-wise. What was Israel? Let me rephrase the question. How many was Israel? All right, but how many was Israel during the time of the kings? Keep that number in mind. Y'all said 12. Hold on tight to that, because y'all saying that 12 kings, 12 tribes in that kingdom were together to make Israel. We'll see if we have that same. We'll see what we had. We'll see if that story is the same when we look at Israel's separation. Is it still 12 or is it 10 and 2? You start to see what it is. And does that make sense now when you see in the scriptures and God saying, don't be like them? Don't go do what they do. Don't try and go and emulate what they got. I am your king. But they not only did they emulate it, they emulated it in reverse. They didn't want to do the king, so they walked a little bit up to the tribal leaders. They didn't want to do the tribal leaders, so they walked up to the judges. They didn't want to do the judges, they walked up to a king, just to end up walking right back to where they started from. I guess it's still traveling. All right, so again, when we see this about Israel, we're specifically dealing with the line of Judah. So you're going to hear them name all 12 of Israel's sons, and then they're just going to start talking about Judah and his children and his line. Again, this is just so we can get to David. By the time y'all going to be experts as the Chronicles. People are like, y'all know Chronicles? I love that book. All right. The sons of Israel, we had Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan. Let me not leave y'all with these little tidbits that I had. I had some good notes. I like to share the notes about Edom. I think I covered it all. Somebody once told me a good memory is better than a better pen or a pencil, something of that nature. I forgot that too. A good pencil. So maybe my memory ain't good. I should get a pencil. All right. So the kings of Edom. All right. So the kings of Edom mentioned in the Bible are lessons we explore historical context, biblical reference, and significance. Historical context: the kingdom of Edom were determined by appointment rather than hereditary succession. Edom was the first occupied and ruled by Esau, the eldest son of Isaac, and later by various kings, including Dahadaban. You can find these if you want for your note takers in your scriptures. Don't want to leave you without it. If you want to find what we was talking about, Genesis 36, 31 through 34. First Chronicles 43 through 54. The enumerating of the kings of Edom. Numbers 20, 14 through 6. Moses sends message to Edom. So you see the actual interaction with the Edomites. And 2 Kings 3, 7 through 9. The king of Israel joins the king of Judah against who? Edom. So as we see, Edom plays a very particular part, all right? The kings of Edom was an ancient kingdom that stretched across southern Jordan and Israel. And the capital was Basra, and it is economically flourished due to trade within the neighbor regions. Edomites was descendant of Esau and was also at war with the kingdom of Judah. All right, there are many other things I could tell you about some of the reigns, but that's where we'll leave it at, because I want to paint the picture of what's going on between these kingdoms. All right, now in the mention of that, we're going to hear Amalek, right? Anybody remember Amalek? Who's Amalek? Anybody remember? Okay, we'll get to it then. I like to tell a story. All right, so now we're into, because that was Amalek was back there. Did we miss that? Did I miss it? Make sure I got it. Yeah.
Back up before Sarah.
Okay. Cool. Got to see her because I was so happy, and we almost walked right over Amalek. You can't miss him. All right, the sons of Israel, and it says Timur and Amalek. Now, why does Amalek stand out to me? Because as we get into the book of Kings, we're going to see that David deals with the Amalekites a whole lot. He deals with the Amorites a whole lot. Saul deals with them. So when we see these people, those are his family that at some point in something, they were told to do something. They were told to help Israel. They were told to support Israel, and they didn't. So we see this is family. This is why it's so offensive to help. If I had to take something and say, hey, I want to teach from the Good Samaritan and say, what is, when we hear the story that Jesus tell about helping the person from another tribe, because remember, the people were from his tribe, the Levite and the priest that came along, and the people that weren't from his tribe was Samaritan. But again, even then, those were his people. This is why the love thy neighbor is so important, because we're all related. We're all close. We all have a connection in some shape, form, or fashion. So when we see these things, we see that it's always been neighbors hurting neighbors. And the whole message from Christ has always been love thy neighbor, because you're all related. We even going to start getting into some of the people that we have seen in the past go up against Egypt get blended into the bloodlines. All right. Went all the way down there. All right, the sons of Israel. So we go through the sons of Israel: Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All right, and then it goes straight to the sons of Judah: and Onah. So for those two, y'all remember what happened with those two? All right, good. I like to go back and bring it back to you. So he had those two sons Onah and Shelah. Those three sons, very particular. We hear about the woman, these three Canaanite women, Vashur bore him. So it was a Canaanite. So we see that, right? So we see he got Canaanite sons, and in this particular instance with his two sons, because you'll hear it say that they were wicked and God killed them. Well, you only hear about the second son. You really don't hear about, well, you do hear about the first one. But in this particular text, it only talks about the first son, right? So was wicked. God didn't like him and he killed him. He put him to death. Well, that is because he was supposed to go into a woman and he didn't. Spilled the semen on the ground. God killed him. Well, the second son did the same thing. So this is the evil that they're talking about right here in the Chronicles. And I will give you the scriptures if you want to go back and read that. Oh, no. I believe that's Genesis.
28.
So here are the scriptures. So the story of the son of Judah was guilty of wickedness in the sight of the Lord, according to the book of Jasher. Again, another non-canonical. This one goes into it, but inside of the biblical context in Genesis, it actually tells exactly what the other son did, and both of their sin was the same. Refusing inhabitably to have children with his wife Tamar, contrary to God's promise to Abraham, see who will be numerous as the stars. All right, so that was the sin. You can find that in Genesis 38, 6 through 7. And if you want to go look in the non-canonical book to give you a little bit more, it's almost the same exact story. It's just a little bit more detail. It's also found in the book of Jasher, 45, verse 23 through 24. Again, I'm not saying you got to go out and get the non-canonical books, but sometimes reading the other books help just fill it in from a historical aspect, because a lot of the stories are told from a historical point of view. What was history like? What were the people like? What were like? So you can see at the time where the population was growing, to not want to produce was a bad thing. It was commanded during that time. That was really, when you think about the commands, they only had a handful, right? Now they had 10. But one of them, what God said is,
A lot of times the story is told that God dealt with him because he spilled the seed on the ground, which in fact happened. But the deal was he was supposed to go into her to have a child. So when he spilled the seed on the ground, it wasn't just that, it was just, since you did that, you just slept with her just to sleep with her. It was no mission in mind for you. You were just sleeping with her. And so that's the way God looked at it, because he would have slept with her, even if he wouldn't have spilled the seed on the ground. There wouldn't have been no punishment in the sense, because it wouldn't have been just sleeping with her to sleep with her.
right.
So those books you're talking about will really give you the true story instead of the what we call sea lawyers telling you their theory of it.
It really points out obedience and disobedience. Again, we see the grand theme of it. Those who are obedient, those who are disobedient. Even in the Chronicles, we see the obedience and disobedience. Urges are important for fulfilling God's purpose and plan our lives. When we refuse to neglect or refuse our responsibility and duty, we can miss out on a blessing and promise. So Urch was out of there. And his brother. Now the last son we know that Judah was like, nah, I don't want that son to go over there and sleep with her because she already killed 2 of my sons. They went over there, so I'm going to go ahead and not do it. Eventually, you go back and you read the story, you see that she sat out there. Eventually, she came out. She took off her maidenhood. I mean, her widow's gear, her widow's clothing, put on her maidenhood, went back out, sat by the well, and eventually Judah ended up sleeping with her. All right, so we can continue on through Judah. We know what happened to his 2 sons. These 3, they were Canaanites. So we see Aaron, Judah's firstborn, was wicked. We talked about that. Now it's going to get into another group of sons. His daughter-in-law, Tamar, who also bore him Perez and Zerah. Judah had 5 sons in all, but now we're going to talk particularly about Perez. Perez had Hezron and Hamal. The son of Zerah, Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calico, and Dara, 5 in all. The sons of now this is where it gets a little tricky, because it's just gonna start rolling through the list of sons. It's just gonna kind of trail on. Eventually, it'll drop a little nugget in there. So I'm not gonna belabor too many of the names. We're just gonna kind of roll through them. Some of them might skip over because I don't need to read them all. I fully believe that we can all read. But if the ones in there that are stand out, we'll pull it out. I will also notice that some of the names may be first time hearing it, but not the first time experiencing it. Like Boaz. We know that Boaz is in there, but we know this is not. Is that the Boaz that we're talking about? Is he? Is it Ruth's Boaz?
Depending on where you.
Yeah.
Depending on where you're at, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got.
It's always a matter.
We got. Jesse.
I want you to keep in mind that familiarity, because that familiarity is how you stay in context with the text. You have to know when they're actually talking about the person that we have read in the stories versus someone whose name they just gave, right? Because this Caleb right here that they're talking about, is that the Caleb that was with Joshua? No. All right. So just let you know, a lot of times when you go into the chroniclers, remember they love to keep the names close. They love to rename, and basically, again, another culture, another thing that we see they took from the cultures, renaming your son so that the name would seem like it carried on forever. All right. So We're going to get into it. The sons of Harazan. We already did. I'm not about to go back to the names here. All right. The sons of Carmen, Akar, the troubler of Israel, who transgressed the matter of devoting things, and Ethan, the son of Azor. Now, we already know what Akar did, right? We're not going to beat that. The sons of Harazan was born unto him Jeremiel. Now, Jeremiel is going to. I want to get right here because I want to get right here because it's they're gonna describe Caleb in a very. If you go down to 42, now we're gonna go back up, chapter 2, 42. Not so much to tell you and read every name of the chronicler to you. This is more to show you how when you go and read the Chronicles, that you can see it in the order that it was and understand. Sometimes the writer may have said things in a certain way, but it meant the same thing. The sons of Caleb, the brother of Jeremiel. So in other words, see how they describe Caleb? But if you didn't go back and understand that they were talking about Jeremiel up here, the sons of Harazah, who was born to Jeremiel, right? These are Hezron's sons. This is after they finish talking about all of the other sons. They go into Hezron's sons. And when they get there, they talk about Jeremiel, Ram, Chelub. Help me out here. Who got that one? That is 9 after Ram. Celebi?
Verse 9.
Verse 9. We went back up 9 to we back on track.
Chalaba.
Celebi?
Chalaba.
Huh?
Yeah.
Verse 1, when you said chapter 2, verse 9?
Huh?
Verse 9. Verse 9. Chalaba.
What chapter and verse you on?
Oh, he's
Chapter
reading
two,
the.
verse
nine.
Verse 9. The last name.
That's just a different name in the NASB. If you look in the NIV, it says Caleb.
Yeah.
Right. So in other words, I'm telling you that the books are all around. Some of the names they put in there are older names. Some of the names they put in there because you're going to see that again with Saul and Mephibosheth. This is not saying that the names are wrong. It's saying keep in mind to where you are and how they're going in the names. That would throw people off, right? If you're reading it, you think you just, depending on what version you get, you may think it's another name out of the blue. I'm just helping you understand how the Chronicles was put in order. All right. So now we can continue on. All right. Hezron born to him the 3 sons, Ram, and we got Caleb's name, which I had my little note here, but I like for y'all. I'm glad y'all pulled that out. It's better when you pull it out yourself because that means you understand it yourself. If I explain everything and just put it all and say this is the answer, you might go along and forget it. It was read to me, but when you come to the discovery yourself of names and how they are coordinated, how they all line up, it just makes more sense. All right, so we're going to continue on. Ram became the father of Amminadab. Yeah, I'm going to let y'all have that one. And Amminadab, and they're going to throw it back to back twice. Amminadab became the father of Nahshon, prince of the sons of Judah. All right. Nahshon became the father of Salma. Salma became the father of Boaz. Boaz of Obed became the father of Jesse. Became the father of he had a whole lot of sons, and it even say that David the 7th. And the sisters, he had some sisters. We always hear about David's. What we love the sisters, and the sisters was Zariah and Abigail. The sons of Zariah. The sons of Zariah was Abishai. These names starting to sound familiar. All right, now we see why David was always so loving and caring because these were his cousins. Like when they were sitting here and saying, David, let's go do that. We hear these conversations. David, let's just go over there and get Saul. It's a cousin. It's a family member who's saying, hey, looking out for our tribe. Remember, Joab was always looking out for the tribe. Look at why. How it was ordered, the importance of establishing your tribe. So when we hear Joab want to go and do this and say, hey man, we got to kill your son, David, like, wait a minute. Are you forgetting his family? And Joab's like, yeah, we family. So these are the relations, all right? But here's the biggest one. And Abigail bore Amasa, The father of Massa was Jether the what? All right, so now we're starting to see that the Ishmaelites ain't too far off. They're close enough to date. They're close enough to be part of the tribe because this wasn't just a thing when you got married, right? These tribes were close. They set it up, which tells you that even in the time of the sons of Jacob, right? Even in the time of the sons of Israel, Israel's tribes and everything, they're still communicating with the Ishmaelites. Does it make sense now why Joseph is in a hole and when they walk up and they say, hey, here come the Ishmaelites. Let's sell Joseph to him. You ever think why the Ishmaelites didn't say, no, we don't want to buy Joseph? They was like, sure. All familiarity. It's all the same area. It's all the same people. They're all around. So it makes sense. You're not seeing these people as some random tribe rolling up on Israel, causing a whole bunch of funk, and it's just a happenstance that God sent them there. No, these have been family members that have been there since day one, who roll up to other cousins' houses and kick in the door and say, hey, cousin, we see that you've decorated everything so beautifully. And the cousins say, well, God gave me this. And they say, well, we want to take it. And then God said, well, that's mine. And then destroy said named cousin. You see how this goes. It's a family affair. All right, so the Ishmaelites, because now we have the Ishmaelites embedded into the family. Caleb, son of who? Also known as the other name up there at the top, right? Caleb. Let's just call him Caleb. All right. I say that because I'm reading from a very simple text. Sometimes the text will leave that in there in the Chronicles, and then you have to understand it. Like, you're like, is that a whole nother person? No, that's Caleb. Just like that was Mephibosheth. All right, Caleb, son of Hezron, he had children by his wife, Azarba and by Jareth. And we're going to wrap it up right here with Caleb. I know it's moving slow, but trust me, it's going to move fast. When Azarba died, Caleb married Ephrath, who bore him Hur, and Hur became the father of Uriah, and Uriah became the father of. All right. So we're going to get into next week. We're going to keep running through Caleb's line. As we progress through Caleb's line, go back, read it. Let's start to try and see for and I'm not saying you aren't, but as you see for yourself, see how the tribes are starting to line up, how the areas are starting to develop, how the people and the population are starting to come together to build kingdoms for defense, how things that make sense now with certain aspects of the Bible where you hear them. They weren't big warriors. They weren't fighters. They had to mow down plowshares because everybody else around them is learning war, when everybody else inside of Israel is learning peace and to trust God. So we see that, and you can see that in the line. And on that note, I will put a pause in it. Ooh, that's a good one. We probably 21. We kind of going in order here. I know it seemed like I'm going out of order, but we keeping it in order. Sometimes when you're talking about family, it can get a little twisted as you start to think about how the family dance around. You know, one of the scenes that I always come to mind when I think of family dynamics, King. And in The Lion King, there's a scene after Scar does something, and Zazu and Mufasa is walking, and it's something on the lines of about a bad seed in every family. And Zazu proceeds to say, well, there's two in mine. So as we can see, this bloodline is probably going to be a couple bad seeds and a couple good seeds, and then eventually we're going to get to David. Are there any questions? Clear as mud? What you got?
Mike,
Bless you,
help
Joey.
also to when you're going through this, and you're talking about, you're stressing that these are all family throughout the history. That's true. But you have to keep in mind too, they're different clans, they're different tribes, they're different, so they're not hanging out at each other's house.
Right.
Yeah, you gotta keep that in mind too. So even though there's family, from history on down the line, it's not like, because they sold Joseph. It's not like they selling him to the house next door.
No, and of course
it was, and that's the way it was.
Right.
They are family, but they're different parts of them. They're different, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And you gotta keep in mind, you're my cousin, but you're over there.
And
I'm over
that
here.
is actually the mindset that they had to a point where they could sell their own cousin. to where they saw their own cousin and said, exactly what Eric is saying. They looked at their own family member, instead of saying, this is family, it's not right, we should do the right thing. They just said, well, he's our cousin. Well, he's our cousin that's over there. And there's the flaw in it. That's the disconnect versus the reconnect. And as we see that throughout the bloodline that we travel, we see where disconnects happen, where twins happen, disconnects happen, people move away from family, family disagreements. So we see that how that branched and grew up into what it was and what it wasn't supposed to be.
The family was so distant, they didn't even see each other's relatives.
Yeah.
You know, there's some different kings, different tribes. So they didn't even look at it as family at all. Like you do today, I mean, we all family in Adam. We don't see that.
Right. But I mean, the most you hear about when we talk about family and going to visit, you know, we hear what Job said. That Job would go see he had, you know, sons and daughters. He would visit in their land and would go to their houses. So a lot of the elders would go and see the family. But if the family had some type of fracture or problematic in between, again, we're reading the scriptures in hindsight with good guy glasses on. That's what I always say. We're reading in hindsight. We don't see that where Job got to go and spend time with his family and all of his sons. Imagine what would the conflict between Abraham and Ishmael. So it doesn't really talk about it too much in here. It doesn't really talk about it too much in a lot of the non-canonical books either. But it does mention that Abraham would go to Ishmael's house. And if we're thinking about it in the lines of Job visiting his family, you would think of it in the lines of that. But it doesn't mention it. So once again, these are all hypotheticals. These are all conversations outside of what we know in the scriptures, that Abraham did see his sons and they were there when he died, which shows some type of connection with Abraham that he had with Ishmael and Isaac. We see that connection. It's still a family connection. Even if the lands were far away, he still came from the mountain of Seir to see his dad, you know, going to tomb, which probably is the same thing when he, you know, the rest of the family as it went on. So it's just putting it all together. Yes, they are distant tribes, just as well as they are distant family. And that's the part that they need to remember. Or in hindsight, we can say a lot of things with my good God glasses on. We should remember that the people that we see out there, even the ones like the Edomites and the Ishmaelites and the Horites, they're still family. So we can start looking at people as family. We probably can get the tribes back right, I guess. Well, Jesus did that. He made us all family. I'm gonna get out the way. Thank y'all.